Hello viewers and future gamers, I am Marcelo from Balandra Studios, historian and content creator for our future game Field of Arms. Now, I figured today I would do a little dev diary showing how we achieve historical accuracy in the scenarios or the so-called maps for our game. And for that, let's go to Wikipedia, of course. Now, but jokes aside, um, this is gonna be as good as a starting point as any if you wanna get your bearings when we're talking about historical sites. Then you can go on to more, let's say, academic sources. So what we're looking at today is one of our maps called Assault on San Felipe, or the Siege of San Felipe, and it involves the fortification Castillo San Felipe de Barajas in Cartagena de Indias. So um, basic information, you can research this yourself. What we're going to do is take a look at how the fort looks today, specifically from this angle, which is how you can see it from the city. So if you're in the city and you look towards the east, I mean the old town, the historical district, look toward the east, you find this massive fortification. And if geographical, or let's say geological features could wear armor, this is how a hill in full on heavy armor would look. So let's take a look. This is the working model for San Felipe. This is not the one that we're going to use though, and this is what I want to talk about. This is how the fort looks today, and this is post 1769, and our game, at least for this map, takes place in 1741, which is one of the sieges that took place during the War of Jenkins' Ear, or La Guerra del Asiento in Spanish, which I have to say is more a precise name because it's talking about what they were fighting for, and I mean, no spoilers, but it was about slavery. So, in any case, I digress. This is a work in progress model for the later present day, let's say, state of the fort. As you can see here, my layers, I have 1769. Let's remove that one and let's go back in time, which is what we want to do, to 1741. Now, I'm not going to switch perspectives that much, so I don't give you a migraine while moving around. This is a working model that is part game design, part historical / archaeological study. And what you see here, in case you're curious, these volumetric models, it's for having a reference for positioning these, let's say, leper hospital, which was more like a leper colony. Back in the day, they thought leprosy was a single disease and that it was incurable and all that. So they isolated the lepers in this kind of miniature cities of their own, and there's quite a lot of material there just to research, just to do, perhaps, I don't know, maybe some kind of game about leper colonies and stuff like that. Anyway, so we're talking about how do we achieve historical accuracy, and we are trying to, in a way, dig out something that we cannot physically do. Now, this is a process of on-site measurements, like what you just saw, in going to the actual place, taking measurements now, because we have that, let's say, the ease or the convenience of being able to do this here. Then you do some kind of studying of satellite pictures, compare those, cross-reference them, and then what I'm going to show you today, the actual historical plans. Now, when you come to 18th century plans, the 18th century is such a nice period just to study the maps and the plans, because for the really good ones, you can just lay them on top of Google Earth or anything like that, and they are a near 100% match. It's really enjoyable just because of that, the amount of precision, and we'll take a little look on that later on. So it's really, really high, the precision that you get. So it's really, really convenient for 3D modeling. Now, I would say that there's at least two extremes, overly simplifying this, of map quality. When it comes to 18th century maps, those were the ones that made by travelers, adventurers, explorers. It was like a second source of exploration with the Enlightenment era and all that, the dawn of scientific knowledge. And which those, I mean, those made by explorers, it could be like a ship's pilot, navigator, um, somebody like a scientist or a botanist that was, traveling the world, registering all of the, quote unquote new fauna and flora. So they would draw, kind of like a doodle of the city, quite detailed if you compare it to a doodle today, in any case. But when it comes to, the angles, the distances, they tend to be a little bit off. And there's the ones made by, in this case, professional officers of the Corps or engineers. Um, no matter which Corps of engineers you're gonna, it's almost a guarantee that you're gonna get a high quality map, especially the ones, for our case, the battle plans, siege plans in which they design how to lay their trenches, where to put the siege batteries and all that. They tend to be quite precise because they were working with those distances in order to be able to bombard one specific place. So those tend to be really, really good, particularly for the case of the Spanish army at the time. The Corps of Engineer was a highly trained one, and they got a lot of influence from the French experience and their own experience, also Italian experience from previous years, and their veterancy while fighting in the Netherlands. As you know, Italian, Dutch, and French fortification, they tend to be their own schools in their own right. They, with the particular styles, with the particular experience, ways to making, to building forts, ways to destroying those forts, sieging them. So by the time Spain was involved in wars with all of those countries, so they basically got a lot of hands-on experience. So by the time the Spanish Corps of Engineers was highly respected, and this is fortunate for us because we get details like this. So as you can see here is a layout of the hill, Saint Lazarus Hill, named because of that guy that was resurrected. So because he was supposed to be, he's supposed to die of leprosy. There was a leper colony right here, so the hill next to the leper colony was called Saint Lazarus also. So, anyways, so it's Saint Lazarus Hill. This is the earliest fortification that you can see, a small triangular bonnet style redoubt. Now we can talk about the triangular shape later, but let's say it was not a preferred shape because of the angles between the bastions. They're too, let's say, acute, they're too narrow, so it's really hard to have crossfire between this angle and this angle. They're basically shooting outwards into their own direction. And what you want in modern gunpowder era fortifications is you want to have crossing fields of fire like you want today. So the triangle was not the preferred shape, but it was used a lot in the Americas because of the geography. So you had like really small hills that were highly important because they were at a stone's throw, maybe more like at a musket shot or gunshot, cannon shot distance from a major city, a major port. So they had to be fortified no matter how small they were. So you had to maximize the space, and that was what you would do with a triangle shape. So you can see here we have the summit and then a series of lower terraces, or let's say other smaller summits. Well, there can only be one summit, I guess. So in any case, or the highest point, and then some adjacent ones. Dominances. That's the technical way of saying it back in the day. Dominances, because they dominated the terrain around them, given the advantage of high ground. So this is a 1716 map or plan by perhaps one of the greatest engineers of the time, Juan de Herrera. And this plan was reproduced by many other publications and travelers when they got to the city and wanted to show back in Europe, what they did, what they found, how the things that they were seeing looked. So we get an idea of how the hill looked back then, before it was completely encased in fortification. So kind of like this, and the encasement of the hill. There we have it. So now let's move on. Like I said before, you have to cross-reference, and this plan, as you can see, this map is based off this one. They moved a little, they center it around the city, and this is authored by Jorge Juan and Antonio de Ulloa, two amazing travelers and scientists of the time, which their own stories and their expedition diaries are worth reading. As as any other historical novel, this would be a true story. But I digress again. So they're showing a more contour shape of this hill, and you get a better idea, with the different shades on how to do the elevations. Now, of course, the elevations we're doing by present-day measurements, but we, especially like let's say the skirts of the hills, those are the ones that we're trying to get more accurately by looking at this. And here's a sneak peek of the instrumentation that they use to make the measurements. And there's an interesting story with these instruments, is that they were used by Herrera before the one that made, the engineer that made the previous plan, the one that actually had to repair San Felipe after it was damaged by the French in the previous century. So after he died, this instrumentation was inherited by his son, who was also a military engineer. Graduated in the own military academy, one of the first military academies founded in the Americas by his father himself. So when the scientists arrived, Juan and Ulloa, into the city to do their astronomical measurements, they were waiting for their instruments, which were on board a French ship that was accompanying them. They were part of a joint expedition in France and Spain to make astronomical measurements. So they arrived earlier, as it used to happen back in the day, and they were waiting on for the French contingent, and they had to use these instruments by Juan de Herrera. So, and interestingly enough, scientific advancements and slavery here, sugarcane, stuff like that. So shows you the real reasons why an empire would like to expand and acquire resources. So in any case, a more detailed look of the hill. And here is where it gets interesting. Now this the author of this plan is I assume, actually, if I'm not mistaken, a veteran of this battle, and his name was Antonio Mason, and he was a lieutenant of the 21st Battalion of Aragon. So he wasn't precisely, let's say, a military engineer, if I'm not correct, but he had prime knowledge of the state of the fortifications during the battle. So this is where it gets interesting, because this is when we have to do the interpretation of the plans. As you can see here, like I mentioned before, it's doodly if you compare it with the previous one. Let's go back. Really straight lines, very precise, correspondent to the shape of the actual fortification. But sorry about that, it's telling us another part of the story, the part in which we start to see field fortifications built around the hill to reinforce the permanent ones. So we have this one here, and this is when we have to be really careful with the, let's say, color coding or the language in which the plan is drawn. It's not speaking language, of course, that's 18th century Spanish, but when it comes to, for example, what does red means. Now red in this case, is a fighting position or a gun emplacement. You can see here batteries, this angle battery highlighted by red, the fort itself highlighted by red, this collateral battery also red, and this hornwork battery, hornwork shaped battery also highlighted in red. And then we have black lines. Now it can get a little bit confusing because black lines are used also to denote roads. This is the road that led to the encampment of the British forces. Now, but also, like you can see, the road, but then there is the words escape me right now. Encirclement, the encirclement of their almost at castrum, but that was ages before. Their encirclement of their encampment. So this is where the British made their camp. It was a hacienda, so they just captured it, took it over, made their headquarters. Sorry, the headquarters was in the monastery of it, which they also captured, and this was their let's say field base, to use a more present-day term. So the black lines are also used not just for the roads, but for palisades, any kind of trench or blockade. But if you realize it, this is a thinner, let's say, softer kind of black line. And when we're talking about barriers or fortifications, we see a stronger dark line. So in the, let's say, war diaries or the accounts of some of the soldiers, both English and Spanish and natives of the city, they mention a trench around the perimeter of San Felipe, and that's what we're trying to reconstruct here. We don't know exactly the millimeter by millimeter size and orientation of said trench, but we can translate some of these features with the knowledge that we have today. So one of the main challenges that I have been facing while doing this reconstruction is the alignment between one piece and the other. So I tried several plans to, let's say the procedure that we use. And excuse this weird artifacts thing here. I've been trying to get 3D Max to stop doing that, but I've been unable to. But in any case, it's not going to detract the objective of this video. So as you can see, I rotated this the opposite way slowly so we don't get confused. This is how the attacker, in this case the British forces, would see the fort. You see the contour lines of the hill, and you see a series of fortifications. So we have a battery built on the actual leper colony itself. Then we keep moving towards the right. Remember, we're on the east side facing west. Then we see this collateral battery, St. Lazarus battery, again in honor of, I don't know if it's in honor of Lazarus himself or the hospital, let's say the hospital, the fort, and then the series or the trench system. And last but not least, definitely, this hornwork battery. These were all earthworks. Every single thing here that you see is an earthwork, but the fort itself. So what you see is a series of terraces or a series of interlocking fighting positions that cover each other. The fortification on the summit covers everything, so the objective here is that if any of these lower positions are taken, they can be recaptured, or they can be, let's say, rendered ineffective by fire from the fort itself, so making it literally an uphill battle. Now, if we're thinking of in terms of gameplay mechanics, what we want to do here is, create a scenario in which at least the British player is going to have to think, strategize, have a lot of teamwork in order to capture maybe points simultaneously. Now the fort has two main roads or two main avenues of attack. One is the east side, the other one is the north side. And as you can see historically, they were fortified by these batteries here, this redoubt here, and on the north, this homework. So they will have to be attacked simultaneously, siege at the same time. So that is up to the player. Now, but we don't want it to be incredibly hard as it was in real life, so they are not able to. So we have to keep that into consideration when it comes to balancing. Now, what were the challenges, or the challenge that I'm currently facing here is how to accurately position the trench pieces. What are the pieces? The main trench itself at the base of the summit, then the lower redoubt down here, then a communicating or a reinforcing trench that has an interesting feature here, and it has a redan. Now redan is a French word and it means a salient. Let's go in an overhead view and I'll show you so you can see why this all makes sense. You never want straight lines or hard 90-degree angles when it comes to interlocking fields of fire. You always want to have them, you want to have salients, you want to have flanking fire. The main reason for this is you're trying to prevent defilade fire. It's defilade fire or enfilade fire. The enfilade fire means that you have guns mounted here, right? There's this gun. Let's take a closer look. And texture gun. So this gun is covering the north side, happily shooting away at the British. Now, if you don't build this fortification here on the side, this redan, sorry about that, this one here, then any kind of shot from a British siege battery on the eastern side is going to hit this gun right in the carriage and it's going to dismount it. And once a gun has been dismounted, trust me, it's nearly impossible to mount it back without the proper equipment. Even harder to do so while under fire. So this redan here makes sense, and it doesn't appear explicitly in many of the sources that we found, but it is hinted in a way. So not in this one, because in this one it kind of blends in with the slope, and that's what it did. They would build those fortifications to maximize, the features of the hills. So you cannot tell that this is a redan, but in a further, more refined plan from the same author, and I have this, as you can tell, in a publication by the Institute of Heritage and Culture of the city. I didn't bother to scan it because my scanner broke down, so that's besides the point. I took a really let's say better than nothing picture with my webcam, and here the redan appears very clearly. Now you can just say, oh wow, like what happens if the guy just shook his hand the wrong way because he was just doodling. This is a refinement of the previous plan, and this is trying to accentuate what was there at the moment, and also let's say compared to the fact that a redan makes sense, but let's say the defining factor or criteria for me at this time is that while I was trying to match all of the plant material for these, and sometimes they were conflicting because they're not to the same scale. And what in this case professional archaeologists do is that they use software, or they use digital triangulation. There are places that that are still there, places that are excavated, and then you compare them with the old plans, and then you match those points and in all the plant material that you have, and then the computer merges them and gives you kind of like a combined picture from all the plant material, even if they are at different scales or they're off a little. So of course the higher priority is taken by the actual archaeological excavations and dig sites of the places that were there. In this case, what happened actually made our lives easier, and is that After this war, because these fortifications were so useful, they proved themselves, let's say, effective in fending off an enemy attack. They were just turned into permanent ones. They were, the earthworks were basically plastered over with stone, bricks, and their, compressed earth to make them stronger. So in this case, we don't need to go and triangulate, you know, lines and the trenches themselves because we already have an existing hill. So in a way, this design was validated in a trial by fire, and this is what we get in the 1769 model of the fort. Wow, that's horrible. So, okay, we have, you know, the lower redoubt, that circular shaped redoubt, changed into an actual battery, a bastion looking battery with a protrusion. The upper redoubt that we saw here, let me show you, this one here, it's turned in the present day version, not just in a full battery, but here this is a mortar emplacement. And I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out that during the 1741 siege there was a mortar placed there. It's the ideal position for mortar fire. Now the other one, the hornwork, got turned into a hornwork, almost following the exact same shapes. One demi-bastion here, another demi-bastion here, on either side. So the shapes of the hill dictate the shape of this fortification. So the redan will go around here, in this inward facing angle. Now what we have instead of the redan is something really clever. Cannot see here because the model is unfinished, but I might be able to show you this in a later diary. Here there's a musketry emplacement that is meant for musketeers, in this case of one, to lay on the prone position and shoot down from gun slits built into the wall itself, and have, again, defilade fire onto this lower battery, this barbican. I think it's called a barbican. In medieval language it's a different thing, but in this, for modern times, the usage of that term changed. So, okay, into this lower musketry battery. So, again, the redan is covering the approaches. If the lower redoubt was captured, or at this time, if this lower battery is captured, then the enemy is funneled into this slope, this upslope, because the other sides of the hill are too steep, and they are met with musketry fire from here. In 1741, it was from the redan. In 1769 onwards, it's from the musketry emplacement here. So all of those things make sense from a defense point of view. There we have it. The upslope being covered by this. Now on a last note, and I'm going to show you the other images that I have here. It is always useful to see more detailed images. This is how the hill looked before the trench and the reinforcing batteries. You can see the other higher points and the ranges, the fields of fire from the fort. It's really useful to get an idea on how to design the scenery for the players to take on. And one of my favorite ones, this contains actually two or three actually of the fortifications that we're going to use in our game, but the one that we want is here. So some of the purposes of these plans were also to inform the back in Europe what their money was being invested on. So they had to show, the king, the members of the court, the ones who were to approve those funds. And remembering that these cities, 45 cities, especially the ones in the Spanish Empire, they were not self-sufficient when it comes to funding. They were dependent on the situado, which is a tax that was collected in the richest um, by royalties, like Peru and Mexico. Basically, they were paying for the protection of their routes that made those viceroyalties rich. So they had to show what they were making, what they were building, and this helped us in, seeing more like art details on how to make our 3D models for the game. Okay, so I expect you, or I hope actually you enjoy um, this map when we release it in its full form, and let's see um, how hard you find it, or if you find it maybe too easy. I'm open to any suggestions or comments. And if you have any questions about the game, about the fortifications themselves, history, about the plans, feel free to leave your comments in the comment sections. I'm gonna leave quotations for where I get my sources. They're basically the Spanish archives and the American Library of Congress when it comes to plant material. Uh, they're really good for that. High resolution scans and that you can use yourself just to travel around and wonder in years past. So in any case, like I said, check out our websites for the game, for our company, and I hope to have secured your support in any form.